Welcome students to Unit 1, the Introduction to Educational Psychology. In this video, we'll briefly have a look at what will be covered in this module. We have done a bit of this already in the introductory video, but we'll touch on it a little bit more as we progress through this video. We will then have a brief look at Unit 2, which is the history of educational psychology, just to frame what we'll be doing this unit. And then we'll end off with a brief look at the various developmental domains, which will be covered in the last unit of this module. So educational psychology, as we find it today, has gone through many evolutions, and various iterations of educational psychology exist. What we find today is what has progressed over the years in terms of how it fits into society and what we need within the educational sphere. So educational psychology is really looking at understanding the behavior patterns of individuals in different educational settings within the learning domain. It provides methods and strategies to solve educational problems, and of course, very importantly, as we will cover in the last unit of this module, it looks at the various developmental domains and milestones within individuals, and specifically for us within children. So we'll be looking at 0 to 18 years old. So we'll look at the cognitive domain, emotional, physical, moral, social, etc. There are lots of domains, but we'll be picking certain ones which I feel need focus for us right now. So in the past, educational psychologists were very focused on finding problems, finding areas where children are doing poorly, and then of course diagnosing it, and then finding solutions was then the issue for the teachers or the parents or somebody else. How it has evolved today is that it's more focused on how do we support learners in their journey of education, how do we empower them to move from where they are to where they need to be without making them feel as if they have a challenge or a barrier, but rather for us as teachers, for us as parents, for us as people within the community and society to support children where they are at, not where they are expected to be. So working with the skills that they have, the characteristics that they have, and the strengths that they have. So there are various definitions to educational psychology. Depending on your focus, you will define it differently. So if you have a more scientific approach, then of course your definition will be more scientifically focused. If you are in the area of education, then you will be looking at educational psychology from a education focus. So it depends on the way in which you view it, of course. So you as students will begin to develop your own understanding of the term educational psychology and how it fits into your world at this point. As you progress through the module, you will start to develop a definition that is very different to what you had originally. So remember right now what you think educational psychology is, and at the end of this module, look back on what your definition was and see how much it has changed, if at all. This will show you how you've progressed, what you've learned, and how your learning has developed. This is a good skill for us when we work with kids. Always look at the knowledge that they come with. How do they understand a concept? And then to look at what learning has taken place, we can then look at the end point. What is the end point of learning of the very same thing that they told you they understood about a concept right at the beginning? So for example, if we ask a child what a tree is, the child can say a tree is something we find in the garden. So that is their understanding at this point, which is correct, but it's not the complete definition of a tree. At the end of the learning, we ask them what a tree is. They will say it is a green object. It has a bark. It has leaves. It's found in the ground. You need to water it. So this is how we see how learning evolves and learning takes place. It's a good way for us to assess learning over a period of time. Okay, so why educational psychology? People ask this question quite a bit. I'm doing teaching. Why do I have to focus on educational psychology? And often when they see psychology, they think counseling, therapy, and that they need to help children with the emotional challenges. But no. Educational psychology focuses on understanding a child, understanding the learning process. It helps you to plan and develop your long-term educational strategies and by understanding the learner, understanding their process. So, for example, if as a teacher, you have 7-year-old boys in your classroom. I'm just using this as an example. So 7-year-old boys love playing, love friends, love being active, but it's also the age where they learn to play by themselves, to focus more on individual play. They feel comfortable with this. So if you don't understand child development, you don't understand how it fits into their development process. You will think, is there something wrong here? Is he being bullied? Does he not have friends? It could be a possibility, but it also helps you to know that it's quote unquote normal for that age and that stage. The same thing with girls and boys. In society, we expect girls to be involved in more safe play, and so that's things like coloring in, playing with their dolls. It develops their fine motor skills, so it helps to develop good handwriting. Oftentimes girls have good handwriting, so we think that's just a girl thing, but it may very well be that they've been exposed to more fine motor skills playing, picking up beads, doing needlework, things that girls in society are expected to do, whereas boys are expected to engage in more risk-taking behavior, climbing trees, jumping off walls, giving you a heart attack when you think, did this child just survive that fall? And that is why boys are usually more active, because they are focused more on gross motor skills, climbing, jumping, and they can play sport a lot better. Not always, but generally, boys are more involved in sport. It's because these are the things that our society, these are the things that our families say. They say things like, that's something boys do, or that's something girls do. It doesn't mean that we should do that, but it is something that happens, and therefore our kids develop in this way. So if you understand the psychology of this within educational psychology, if you understand why children are doing the things that they do, you will then know why they develop in the way that they do. So if we as educators can harness the knowledge of people and understand why they do what they do, it will help us to plan and implement educational strategies to suit a child or to suit an individual. And of course, the rest of the points here are also important. Educational psychology helps to identify areas of growth in our education system. Definitely, if we notice that we're not focusing enough on, for example, fine motor skills, just a basic example, we can then identify that. It helps to identify potential educational pitfalls and identifies and studies learning methods to better understand how people absorb and retain information, and therefore allowing you to be more inclusive and individually focused. So as I spoke about earlier, we're looking at the history of educational psychology in the next unit, but this is just a brief look at what we will be focusing on. So it looks at where the beginnings of educational psychology really are, and there is a paper that we're going to be reading, which is the 100-Year Journey of Educational Psychology. We'll read it in Unit 2, and it will outline a little bit how all these theorists were involved in the development of educational psychology. This is the continuation. So you'll see people like, let me go back very quickly, you'll see people like Locke, and how his work, we can actually see where his work in the areas of behaviorism, or rather the work in his area has affected behaviorism, and Skinner's work is sometimes connected to his, as well as Thorndike in the area of behaviorism. So we'll talk about it a little bit more in detail in the next unit. Throughout this module, we'll also be looking at the theories of development and how they relate to education. So Piaget's stages of cognitive development, and then the stages of psychosocial development as introduced and proposed by Erik Erikson, which is very important for you to understand, because it helps you to know children at the various stages within their development. And it's actually very effective in you looking at the milestones, or looking at what the milestone should be for children. This is the scaffolding and zone of proximal development, this one over here, proposed by Lev Vygotsky. We'll be looking at that too. And of course, the bioecological model is something that we're going to have a huge focus on as well. So the Tenant of Developmental Domains is extremely important within this module and generally within education. For us to understand, as I said earlier, the development of a child is extremely important. So we'll be focusing on the intermediate phase, yes, but we'll also be looking at the stages prior to that and post that. Why? We need to know what a child has gone through, what the experiences have been, what milestones they have achieved or missed, and that is why they are where they are in terms of the intermediate space. And then, of course, where they need to be, because we need to know where we need to move our kids from. Yes, of course, we're looking at them as an individual. We're looking at them as what their abilities and strengths are. But we also know that they need to go to, for example, to high school. We also know that they need to develop to be able to deal with puberty, for example. So how do we prepare them for those various life cycles and life changes is an important consideration for us within the developmental sphere. We will look at biological components, cognitive components, social and personality, mental and physical health. All of this is a holistic view of a child. Within the developmental domains, I spoke earlier about the gross motor, fine motor skills, communication, cognitive, social, and adaptive domains are also something that needs to be focused on, because your child has one child has various levels and domains that they are made up of, if I can say it in that way. A child is not just one thing. A child has gross motor skills, so they can move their limbs. They have fine motor skills, they can write on the board. Fine motor skills and gross motor skills also connect for a child to be able to read and write. We'll talk about that later in the module. It's very interesting because we need to know that, for example, when a child is in nursery school and they do Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, or the spider climbs up the water spout and they're moving their fingers, that movement of their fingers is to develop the fine motor skills. When they're playing in the park, when they're on the swing, when they're on the climbing up the sliding board, that's to develop gross motor skills. And all of these come into play for them later to develop good balance, to play sports, to read, to write, and to generally engage in educational activities. Educational psychology also guides us in terms of the various stages within subject content progression. So, for example, it will help us to understand at what age a child is ready, and this is important for us to know, at which stage is a child ready to learn about fractions within mathematics. When would they be able to grasp that concept? We cannot just teach children randomly. We need to know that they are, at this point, they have this foundational knowledge upon which we can build the next knowledge. And so it's going to be exciting for you to look at how a child develops, what they need to know at this point to be able to know the next thing. And so this is something that we're definitely going to be looking at as well in this module. Okay, so I think educational psychology is going to be a very interesting subject for you. We are going to be doing a lot of reading, but it's going to set the tone and create the framework for you to understand your student, to understand the learning process, and to understand where things could possibly go wrong. So try to keep up with your reading, work at a measured pace, try to work in teams that helps you to work through all of the reading, because the information that we cover within this module, Educational Psychology 1, is going to build a foundation upon which we build new knowledge and new understandings in Educational Psychology 2, when we get a lot more specific, a lot more focus on the areas within child development. We're going to look a lot more at the practical skills and practical tasks, some of which we will cover within Educational Psychology 1 as well. So welcome to an exciting journey. I am very happy that I get to be your guide and facilitator on your introduction to educational psychology. And please, as always, if you have any issues, challenges, or if you want to share information, please feel free to contact me. Have a lovely beginning of your education journey, or your cluster journey for this cluster, and I look forward to hearing from you.